So just as Hamilton joins, recording is now switched on. So for those of you, depending on how you've joined, you should be able to see that through Signify. I think it's normally listed in the participants list principally. Now, slightly different format today, so welcome everyone. What we're going to do today, as you're hopefully all aware, we're going to start with a discussion on some of the learnings from some of the DOE resolver deployments, and to that end we've got John Todd from Quad9, Jim Crowe from Comcast, Nic Leymann from Deutsche Telekom, and Andy Fidler from BT, all of whom I believe are on the call. So we'll take them in that order, just to share their reflections on what they've seen since their respective resolvers went live over the summer. I think a good year ago, others more recently than that. I am aware that there are other people on the call who also run resolvers, either cloud resolvers or as ISPs. So be sort of plenty of other points for you to share, I'm sure. So what we're going to do is to take each of those in turn, just to get some comments from each on what they've seen, what they've learned to date. And it'd just be interesting to see where that takes us, what the similarities and differences are. And then we'll take questions afterwards, although if there are points of clarification, then obviously ask those as we go through the conversation. What would be helpful, if you're able to, is if you could if you could raise your virtual hand if you want to interject. And for those of you who are less familiar with Zoom, if you have the participant list viewable, the virtual hand should be viewable if you sort of look over to the bottom of the participant list. So please raise it there if you can. And could I also ask, as we've got a reasonable number of people on the call, if you're not talking, if you could, if possible, mute your lines, just to make it easier for everybody else, which I think I'm right in saying, for those of you that have just dialed in, I think is *6 to both mute and unmute. I say that with some caution, purely because I've never dialed in on Zoom previously. I've always used a PC client. So that would be appreciated. And with that in mind, we'll start with John Todd from Quad9. And as I say, we'll then go through Comcast, Deutsche Telekom, and BT in that order. So over to you, John, for your learnings on your resolver.
Well, good afternoon. So they say that you should, lead with the summary, and the TLDR here is that we've had quite a good success with DOE. There haven't been any significant problems yet, and I emphasize the word yet because of load. So having said that, as kind of the spoiler, I'll go into kind of how we did it and the multiple ways actually that we implemented DOE. So Quad9 has been, we actually launched, we were the first major resolver to launch with DOT quite some time ago. And following, it was slowly adopted. Really, the big push with DOT came, of course, with Android Pie. That's where we started to see traffic pick up. And similarly with DOH, we've seen since last year, I think it was, actually I don't remember what month it was, May or June last year, I think we launched with DOH. Similarly, the adoption curve has been fairly long and easy, which, that's a one-time event for anybody who's listening. I'd suggest that now is the time to implement DOE while the traffic is not a blowtorch, and get your experiences with it as quickly as you can while there's still a chance of not everybody using it. So we deployed Doe initially on HA proxy and Nginx. At that point, there were no robust Doe receivers natively built in except for NOT, and we don't run NOT right now. We run on the back end, well, we run DNS dist in front of all of our systems, and at that point, DNS dist did not have a Doe module. We were constantly pestering Bert to get that done, but it took quite a while to get rolled out in a way that was ready for production. And they did a really great job in supporting it. But of course, just doing a shim with TCP, shimming the Nginx and HA proxy answers into DNS dist over TCP was the way we went. We did lose some telemetry with that, but we don't collect much anyway, so it wasn't that big a loss for us. In fact, we collect nothing as far as IP addresses go, so losing the actual origin wasn't a significant problem. There are actually some advantages and disadvantages in both of those directions. DNS dist, of course, now does have DOH and DOT, and for that matter, DNS crypt built in. So if you put DNS dist in front of your recursors, there's some significant advantages to that, and that would be my general suggestion: is that DNS dist is kind of the way to fly for doing that, and you get load balancing, and you get some interesting statistics as well out of that. But also you get some failover and ability to spread load, which is quite nice with DNS dist. So we went for, I think it was probably 5 months or so, 6 months with the DNS dist sitting behind Nginx and HA proxy doing the shimming. And that worked quite well. There are some advantages actually to that, in that DNS dist, while having the direct ability to terminate 443, it doesn't quite have the robustness yet of a lot of the scaling and a lot of the knobs that HA proxy and Nginx have for handling large inbound loads. And that's going to, and I can't say because I don't have experience with NOT, but I'm going to guess that that's probably the case there too. You know, that's some of these, the web termination front ends have had a lot more experience with these massive numbers of TCP sockets and denial of service and a bunch of other things. So we've left both methods in place in our infrastructure, even though right now today we are using DNS dist natively. We've left both in place so that we can switch back and forth fairly transparently based on conditions in each location or location conditions across the network as a whole. Right now we're operating entirely on DNS dist, and we've had no reason to fall back to the other method, but it's there just in case. You never know, and it's good to have multiple options in your pockets. And there's also a lot of relatively new code in DNS dist that's not been exposed to attacks for denial of service. So we've tried to have always at least 2 different ways of solving the same problem available. Our experiences as a centralized resolver might be a little different than ISPs as well. The bulk of our query, despite the fact that we're of course a service designed for end users, and if you look at our website, it looks very much like it's geared to end users, that's actually not where most of our queries come from. Most of our queries come from forwarding caches. So it's universities, hospitals, basically anywhere an IT administrator wants to get some of that security component that we offer. So most of our queries don't come from DOE-enabled systems yet. They're coming from forwarding resolvers, which are very slow to upgrade. So we have not seen probably the same rate of growth in DOE as we have just in our general query volume. And if you're an ISP, you're going to see different numbers than what we see. And interestingly, in the last 30 days, 40 days, we've seen a significant shift in our DOE traffic as people move. Obviously, they're not going to work, they're not going to school, so now they're going home. And so we're starting to see and also with Chrome's larger distribution now of DOH, we're seeing a growth rate that looks, and I'm going to average this out, I'm just looking at the graph, I pulled it up at the beginning of the call here, we're probably looking at about 10% to 15% growth week over week in DOE query volume over the last 40 to 60 days. So it has grown quite dramatically, much faster than it has previously. It's hard to tease apart whether that's due to the increased number of DOE capable systems, or whether that's the fact that people are now shifting away. We still see the same traffic growth and the same traffic volume, but the places from which that traffic is emanating are different. It's actually from people's end devices and not so much the forwarding caches, although there is, of course, still a huge volume of forwarding cache data. Kind of caveats and tricks. I unfortunately, this is a really boring summary for me in that we really haven't had any. We did a lot of experimentation with DOE. We haven't had any what I'll call showstopper issues. We've had to do a slow rollout initially because we started to see some TCP buffer issues. And I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly what the details were, but that was a quick resolution. That was like an hour of fixing. And so, I'm really pleased to see Chrome rolling out now with the larger tests. We do see quite a bit from the DNS crypt package, which of course supports DNS crypt, but also supports DOE. We see a lot of Linux systems now forwarding to us there, but I'm really waiting to see what happens when a large number of forwarding caches start to switch over to DOE or DOT and send us our queries that way. Reusing sockets, I think, has been a big issue. Keeping sockets open for a long time has been an issue. We close them, I believe it's at now 10 seconds is our closure rate, and we'll probably up that as soon as we start seeing more and more users spending more time with an open socket that's valid.
John, just to interrupt, I can see Brett has raised his hand with a question.
Okay, I didn't see it in the chat. Is that in the chat?
He's raised it's in the participant list.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just had a very small comment / question. I was interested that you attributed, at least partially attributed, the growth rate of DOH into the rollout to Chrome. But I understood that Google hadn't rolled anything out to Chrome yet.
No, but it's in some of their beta, and you can, I believe, download it and compile it yourself in Chromium.
Right. And would you have thought enough users would have done that for you to see that in your traffic patterns?
No. The answer is I don't know. So I'm interested in what Chromium is doing, but I'm also interested in what manual configuration in Firefox, and then also those connections to us via the DNS crypt package. We don't track user agents. That's
Right.
part of one of our privacy issues. So I can't give good statistics. So I'm kind of speculating based on the activity I've seen with the Chromium mailing list, and also just what people are asking us about on our support.
It seems to me, and I'm only speculating as well, that the more likely ramp up is the fact that Firefox have turned it on by default for at least a proportion of the North American users.
Well, we're not in the TRR list yet. So even if Firefox turned it on, and they have, they're not automatically switching to Quad 9. So they'll have to manually configure us, which quite a few people do.
Yeah.
But that I think is as equal a growth rate as we'll see from Chromium until it becomes auto conversion.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, but I don't know. It seems odd that you would get a large growth rate at all at the moment, if I'm honest.
Yep. DOT is still, orders of magnitude. I shouldn't say orders of magnitude. It is at least an order of magnitude and more than our query volume with DOH. And the query volume with DOT is remaining relatively the same. It's growing really at roughly at the same rate as our customer volume is. It's not growing faster or equal to what we're seeing with DOH. So it does appear that the slow roll of people converting over to converting to newer Android devices which support auto conversion is slower than the rate of DOH adoption. So that's an interesting metric. And then DOH is ramping up where DOT is remaining constant with client growth.
John, I can see two other raised hands, and And I should also compliment Brett for having a Defender console behind him for maternity, which has nothing to do with what you just said, John, but it just caught my eye. Paul Adair from Infoblocks has raised his hand, as has Nic Leymann from Deutsche Telekom. So, Paul.
So just curious, are you tracking things like connection reuse? Do you have any data there on that regard?
We are tracking connection reuse. It has been not great, and I'm sorry I don't have any numbers, but it hasn't been as good as we would hope. I know that there's been some issues with client drop off early, meaning that the clients are only holding the session for 2 or 3 seconds, and we see the same client connecting repeatedly. In other words, if they had left the connection open, we would have seen more queries going through that socket, and there's kind of needless TCP reuse. I don't have the data on who's doing that. Again, we've only been looking at that question for about 2 or 3 weeks, and honestly, it's been taking a backseat to some other problems that we've been sorting out with obviously with ingestion of COVID blocking data. And again, because we don't track our client IDs, I couldn't tell you who's doing it. But yeah, we're seeing not fantastic session reuse, if that was the root of your question.
That was, thank you.
Okay, and Nick.
Yeah, quick comment to the move towards encryption. So what we see in our networks that traffic not hitting our own DNS platform, that those traffic, it's around 7% overall, that within those 7%, there is a shift from unencrypted to encrypted. So to me, it seems to be that people which are, say, actively changing their DNS configuration, that those people are at the moment moving from unencrypted to encrypted DNS.
And I would agree with that. They tend to be the power users who
Yeah.
have a better idea of how to do it, so they're more interested in doing that. How are you distinguishing the users who are using central recursors but are using encryption? Are you just looking at the IP address?
Yeah, we are looking on IP address, port numbers, and stuff like that. So it's not a full, say, 100% analysis, but it gives at least a slight hint at what's happening in our network. But it's not a standard feature, so we only do it, say, by request, or if we have certain needs to monitor parts of the network. So it's not done in the whole network. It's, for instance, done for certain locations on request.
Okay. Any other hands raised? I didn't see any.
No, I think that's all the hands raised.
So, I mean, I guess I'll get back to the summary, which was that it's been relatively easy for us because the volume has been low, and the lessons that we have learned haven't affected as many people. And I'm sure as scale goes up, we will discover more and more edge cases, and of course, those edge cases contain more and more people. But I would say that if you're contemplating DOE or DOT for that matter rollout, now would be the time to do it while the pain is not so great for mistakes.
Excellent advice, thank you, John. Okay, well, let's move from John for now, and obviously if people have got questions we can pick them up at the end as well, but in the meantime let's go from John on Quad 9 to Joe from Comcast, who I think, are you now live? You've gone from trial to production version, Joe, or are you still just out in your trial? I can't remember the switchover date.
So we're still on beta. Our switchover we were going to look to do sometime this quarter, but as everybody's going through the same thing in the world, trying to stay out of the fog and not get sick, some of our production and expansion stuff has kind of been put on hold. Doesn't mean that we aren't still moving forward where we can. We are currently in contact with our vendors that we use to provide our DOE front end and find anything that we can do for updates. John mentioned connection reuse. That's one of our big things that we're looking into now during this downtime, to allow the code to be updated to actually account for the DOH connection reuse. That's one of the things that we, on our end, we don't have insight in, and I'd like to have more insight of that. I could speak kind of high level of what we're doing. We're front ending our a couple of our DNS servers right now in the beta with a load balancer that's going to be doing a DO proxy translator, and it's also doing the TLS offload. So at our load, we've currently, since everybody's working from home, we've seen about 30 to 40% DNS traffic uptick across the board, not just on DO, but like, you know, everybody's knows the 600 billion, 500 billion. We're now about 900 billion plus. So that's just regular DNS. So our DOH has steadily going up since we are part of the Chromium trial that was publicly put out not too long, or a couple months back. Since we're a part of that trial, our DOH traffic, we see probably on any given time anywhere between 3,000 or 6,000 to 12,000 queries per second. It's hard for us to kind of get any unique count on that. It's hard for us to also get some of the user agent information, because we're trying, you know, as far as the privacy goes, we're trying to keep this as transparent as possible and let the product do what it's supposed to do. On the back end, we're definitely not able to see anything at all. We are moving forward with, right now we only have one DOH solution. We are moving forward to see if we can start testing other DOH solutions, just so we can have an A/B type of situation. You know, don't want to always put your eggs in one basket and then, you know, there's something that comes up and you can't switch it off. One of the lucky things that does happen is that if your DOH endpoint does go down, at least with the clients that are using it now, it does go over to DO53, and that kind of helps. It does hide a couple of things with troubleshooting, but I think, you know, as we move forward with this as an organization and as a Eddie group and other people that are providers, we can give that best guidance of, hey, yeah, you time out this long and definitely try to retry over DO53. One of my biggest things right now is finding statistics on how we can get better statistics without really exposing any type of user information or PI. It's, you know, that's a big thing on top of, and I've mentioned it before on other talks, is being able to do proper load testing. There's really nothing out there. We've been pushing to see if we can get people out there to utilize our innovation fund to actually build a new product or build a new tool that would be able to do stress testing on a DOH endpoint natively. I mean, right now, the way that I do it is I set up a forwarder, and then I use DNS perf and push to that forwarder that's now forwarding. So now that's one step in between that might be a bottleneck that I'm, you know, that I don't want to be there. So, you know, going forward, you know, we're just trying, we're going to be doing DOT more. We do have a DOT endpoint out as well. We are definitely doing a A/B testing with that. We're using 2 different solutions. Right now with this downtime, I've been doing a lot of automation around that. So, you know, we have a lot of servers and we want to be able to just turn this up when it gets there. You know, in our connections, you know, I'm able to see how many connections we get, but again, I don't know if that's per second, per minute, you know, but on average, we're seeing 20 to 40,000 connections on our front end. So it's being used, and you know, at our scale, we just want to make sure that anything we put out there, if it becomes a default on anything, and if we end up being a part of anybody's default list or however discovery happens, that we will be able to handle that type of load.
Can I just check, Joe, was that 20 to 40K connections on DOT?
A DOT, I don't really have specifics on DOT. It's a little bit harder for me to get DOT statistics the way that we have it set up, but I am looking to try to figure out how I can do that a lot better, and I'm hoping that you know, this downtime gives us that, you know, that range to be able, oh, I don't need to pick up these 20 other projects that could kind of be on hold right now to be able to put some focus on this. that saying that this hasn't been my focus. I kind of live and breathe this, and you know, we have a lot of people in our organization and in Comcast in general that are very interested on how they can utilize this as well as for their products. So it's, you know, it's gained a lot of attention from a lot of other people, not just networking DNS operators, which I think has been very interesting. And a lot of the security folks on our end have been like, hey, what do we do? How can we do it? And what makes it better? So I think one of the bigger things that we've been looking at is the security part of it, of, you know, how can this be hacked? Not looking at it at a DOT or a DOH or a DNS perspective, but how can it be hacked as a web server? How can it be hacked as just another service out there? Can the translators that we're using, be it DNS dist, be it a front end, be it a translator that we just open sourced, is that, are those breakable, and how can those break? So, you know, we've been reaching out to people to be able to break those. You know, like, I want to know how it can break. I've broken things on when we first rolled this out and said, hey, this is broken here. You know, quite a few people on the Eddie list have pointed out some few things on our first beta rollout, which has been interesting and has helped us shape where we're at now. So, you know, what we have here for the list has been very invaluable, and it's awesome to be a part of it.
Okay, I can see no immediate raised hands for Joe. Does anyone have any current burning questions, or do you want to save those until Nick and Andy have spoken? We'll just give you a moment to raise your hand if you wish, or come off mute. No. Okay. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll come back with some questions momentarily, Joe. But in which case, thank you, and let's then move from West Coast US to Germany. Nick, you've just come off mute. So, what picture have you seen? What have you learned within Deutsche Telekom so far?
So there are no really big changes compared to the last time I gave a short overview. We are still, I would say it's a kind of pre-beta. So we are testing with, say, internal people, but not really with employees. So it's mainly people from DNS ops teams and also people which are internally asking us for the URL. Nevertheless, the whole platform is more or less open. So if you know the URL, you can also do external tests. Next step is probably with a larger number of people, but in order to do so, we are currently, and I think that's the main challenge for us, to come up with a policy for DOH so that we have a description how the service behaves in terms of do we logging or not and things like that. In fact, we are not logging at all. So I think the setup technical-wise is quite similar to the Quad 9 setup. So it's based on Power DNS with DNS dist. And there's also no logging of customer data enabled. So no log files, nothing at all. The only thing the platform does is basically replying to the queries from the customers. One of the challenges we have is exactly the same as Joe mentioned, the load testing with DOH. So we did some tests with DOT, but we also see basically the lack of load testing tools for DOH. I mean, we checked and there's almost nothing available. You can do functionality tests, but if it comes to performance, the only thing to test TCP performance is really to do it with DOT and then to hope that DOH will be the same. So in terms of rollout, I mean, I mentioned it earlier, the whole platform is already DOH enabled, and the next step is then after we have the policies, we will publish the policy, and then we hope to have a ramp up on the overall platform so that we can offer DOH and also DOT to all of our customers. Yeah, I think that's all I have at the moment, if there are no questions.
Okay, any raised hands for Nick immediately? Oh, I see one with Brett, so fire away, Brett.
Not really a question, more a comment that a couple of people, the last two speakers have both said that they're struggling to do DOH testing. And I don't have a great deal of detail on this, but I do know that knowing that we've been using a tool called Locust. I don't know if anybody else is aware of that.
No, never heard of it.
I'll put a link in the
Yeah.
chat. And if you need any, if you have any questions or queries about how we're using it, hit me up with an email afterwards, and I'll put you in touch with somebody at Nominate.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
Excellent. And I'll include that in the notes as well for anyone if you're on a phone and can't see the chat. That's really handy, Brett, because clearly that's come up twice now, so that's going to be very useful. Okay, thank you, Nic. Again, I'm sure there'll be other questions as people just reflect on the discussion. Oh, actually, there's one now. Norman has a question, so fire away, Norman. You might be on mute, Norman.
Yeah, unmuting helps. Sorry about that.
We've all done.
So it's actually not a question for Nic, because I can ask Nic much more easier directly by giving him a call in our organization. But when Brett is mentioning that there is a tool called Locust, one of the things that I was wondering is if anybody is working potentially with the guys at NS1 who did this one DNS ORG published tool that would allow load testing, and the other are the CZ-Dig guys who have done the DNS, I think, shotgun thing. But both are at max DOT, right? So it seems that both are kind of waiting for a project that beefs them up. But nobody has really picked up the task yet to work with these guys to do that. Both are kind of open source developments as far as I know, but there may be an opportunity. I just wanted to share that idea, including that, of course, we also haven't decided that we kind of pick up a wad of money yet and just hire people, right? But it's just a mention.
Could you, if you wouldn't mind, Norman, if you have a moment, could you put a link to that? Just drop me an email with that if you have a moment. Oh, actually,
John has just put the DNS, the NS1 tool, and yes, I can, in the same chat, I can immediately copy the pointer to what the guys at CZ-Dig are doing.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for allowing me to inject.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for that, and thank you also, John, for putting that linking so quickly. Somebody has got a raise hand. I think it might be Pat, possibly. Someone who's in.
Yeah, hi, it's me. Sorry, it's Pat.
Lucky guess.
Just an observation here. There's a lot of tests, obviously, and I get why you guys would do it from the server end of things, and I completely understand that. I just wondered, because there is a possibility non-performant DOE servers could adversely affect your customers, your subscribers. I wondered if anyone's had any kind of thought about analytic framework or a framework for testing from the client using different DOE servers. Reason why is I've been using something headless. It's a browser which can be tuned either using a Firefox or Chrome browser engine. You have full access to it programmatically, called Selenium. And from that, you're able to start and trap requests, and you work out timings. Is any consideration given then to the client end?
So yeah, there's this is Joe from Comcast. So on our end, that is definitely one of our big considerations. Is yeah, we definitely want to know our server performance, but client performance is going to be a very big one. That's part of what I mentioned earlier. We're leaning on other teams that do those types of testing heavily in our organization to see if they can come up with a test bed on our end for us. Our world's UDP, okay, and some TCP. Now we're getting forced to an HTTP.
Gotcha. All I would say is you can run these things headless, and it's like running an instance of a browser, and you can control it programmatically, either Python or C++, whatever your poison is. But you can render complete websites and but you can run a suite of tests as if you're doing performance tests, and that's the interesting part. And
yeah, I think that would be a good.
Yeah, I just flagged that up because I completely get why you guys are kind of server oriented. You're worried about big bits of tin, but the other side of the equation is unhappy users. You're going to get a big lag on your help desk calls.
Yeah. Well, again, let's put a link to that in the notes if that's of interest to people. And also, I can see while we've been talking, Glenn has also plugged the Comcast Innovation Fund for anyone that wants to look at developing those sort of load testing tools.
Cool. Is this something that we could share via the EDDI website? Is that appropriate?
Yeah, you can do, or if you email it to me, Pat, I'll put it in the notes, which I'll then put out on the Eddie list as well, if that's useful.
Thanks.
Thanks, Pat. Okay, well, let's, on that note, then move on to Andy Fidler from BT, last but not least in our quartet of speakers, and then we'll open up more generally for questions which you can direct at any or all of the four as well. So Andy, any insights from BT's point of view, particularly anything new and different to those that you've already heard?
Great, thanks, Andrew. From a BT perspective, we enabled our DOE public resolver trial back in December based on Open Exchange's capabilities. The trial's still ongoing and it's going well, but we're only seeing low volumes, circa 10 queries per second peaks. And this is mainly because the trial's been mainly used by a number of BT employees, a limited number there. We really can't progress the trial to larger volumes until there's a DOE discovery tactical solution or a standard solution to support ISP identification for those using stub resolvers in their home hubs, which only present private IP addresses to the clients. Without this, the customer experience for DOE discovery will be suboptimal. So that's the main call out from us at the moment. We are currently carrying out some limited performance tests comparing DNS over 53 with DOE. Using SAMNO's white boxes. It's too early for me to comment on those test results at the moment, but well, I hope to be able to comment on them in the near future. The other aspect we're currently looking at is options to use hardware accelerators to potentially mitigate against some of the DOE capacity overheads aspects that we are starting to see. Sandra, that's the main update for me.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I know you said it's obviously too early to comment on the SAMNO's test results yet. Is there anything at all you can say about what's being tested?
The main thing we're comparing is the resolution time and response time for DOE versus DNS over 53.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess we'll await that with interest. I can see Ralph is sat in a very sunny spot somewhere in Europe. I'm not entirely sure where he was. He was just on the screen, just disappeared from mine, but others may be able to see him. But Ralph has raised his virtual hand. So do you want to come in with a question, Ralph?
Yeah, sure. It's Germany, in the middle of Germany, where the weather is nice at the moment. So the question is to kind of all the speakers there is on a level, say 10xn, what is currently n when you compare the DOE numbers to your regular DNS numbers?
So give anyone a chance to do some quick mental arithmetic to give an order of magnitude difference between DOE and I guess that was specifically DNS over 53 as the comparator. So does anyone want to kick in with some observations on that?
This is John from Quad 9. I would say we're looking at probably 3 orders of magnitude difference. It's pretty significant for us. But again, we're not in any automatic, other than Chromium, which is a very small community, we're not in any automatic upgrades yet.
Yeah. And Joe looks like he might come.
I'm not going to do the math. It's too much. We're, it's our DOE is very minimal compared to what we're seeing in DO53. Similar with DOT.
Yeah, it's almost a rounding error, I guess, in the comparison.
Yeah, same for us. I mean, we are still in a beta, so it's a handful versus a couple of million requests per second. So,
Yeah.
And exactly the same as Nick from a BT perspective, very similar numbers.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. I mean, that kind of echoes what I think Andy said. Without any discovery mechanism, the numbers will not go up.
Yeah, that's a critical one. And I know there's some work's underway at the moment looking at at least an ad hoc discovery mechanism for those with private IP addresses for their CPE, which could see a step change in volumes if that goes forward as a tactical solution. I see John has his raised hand, so you can toss a hard question at your three compatriots, John. That could be interesting.
That's who it's directed at. So I would be interested in understanding what everybody else is seeing as ratios between post and get.
Okay.
Does
anyone have any stats on that?
Give me a minute. I can pull something up. I was just looking at that actually.
Yeah, we see just so I can tell you what ours look like. We're looking at about slightly under 40% of our queries are post, and the rest are get, which is I honestly I didn't expect that. I thought it would be overwhelmingly one or the other. 40% is a bigger number than I was thinking.
Yeah. Where are you?
I don't know if Andy or Nick have any numbers to hand that they'd wish to comment with.
I actually I'm seeing a lot more get than I do post. I mean, probably like 300-400 times more get than I do
300 times. Interesting. Yeah. So I think I might just have one or two users who have their own homebrewed dough that they're hammering on us with post. But yeah, as I said, I was very surprised to see those numbers. We do see, and that's an interesting point that I didn't raise in my conversation. We do see that there are a few people in certain, we have whatever 150 locations, and a couple of locations, notably Singapore and New York, I think, have a much greater volume of dough than anywhere else. And if we really boil it down, we can look and say, oh, this is really emanating from just a single IP address. So there's somebody in each of those two cities who's really doing a lot of stuff on dough. And I'm not sure if it's their own custom shim or if it's if they're front-ending a recursive a forwarding cache with a dough shim. But again, being in the front end or being in the centralized resolver world, we see a lot more weird experimental stuff because anybody who's trying their own code is like, oh, well, point it at one of the big three different open recursors and see what happens. And so we get some of those strange one-off kind of things. So that might be where my post volume is coming from.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, anyone else got any questions either for Andy or more generally for anybody else that they want to come in with? Or indeed observations, if those of you that are running your own resolvers, other ISPs or others, where you may maybe have a different perspective. And I see Norman has raised his hand, so come in, Norman.
Yeah, most of the people who are currently speaking basically are doing installations that target the public as a whole, right? Is there any observation or approach or architectural consideration for policy awareness or country awareness in the deployments at anyone, or is the fact that if you're sitting in the US, you're happy with your serving the US, period, and then there is one approach, one policy, one deployment, and that's it?
So you're driving at to differentiate potentially depending on the origin of the query.
I'm asking if anybody sees this as a challenge or as a requirement, and if that requirement is in some fashion considered in what is currently ongoing in the trialing,
Yeah.
or not, right?
Okay.
This is Joe from Comcast. So we currently are open during our beta. We might look into just keeping this for our customers because, you know, our customers are our end users ultimately on every product that we use. It doesn't mean to say that, you know, there could be conversations about, you know, having a separate public, but, you know, one of my big things during that is being able to block per origin, and how could we do that? And that's the matter of, you know, where we would go. Would that end up being on an edge device via an ACL above the DOE endpoint? Would that be on the DOE endpoint itself? We're unsure of that currently. You know, I think if we were to do something on the DOE endpoints themselves with some sort of ACL like that, it might cause some unneeded overhead. So, you know, but it's those types of things we need testing with, because and with the load that we're seeing, and I think that everybody here that's doing DOH and DOT, they're not, you know, the load isn't there to really say, oh yeah, if I turn this on right now, I would see a big difference, because there's really, you know, you don't have the capacity there or the load there to show that, at least on our end.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else with a different point of view on that?
Sure. This is John again from Quad 9. That question is actually, there's an enormous amount below the waterline on that question. And a large portion of the question, it hinges on DNS in general, not necessarily just on DOE, and certainly not necessarily just on DOE as the only encryption method. You know, to look at it at the highest level, one of the components of your question might be, do any of these providers treat encryption differently based on what jurisdiction is the origin and what jurisdiction is the termination? And right now, my answer to that is no. Wow, that's a really strange thing that just happened there for you, Andrew. You just drank out of a white, your cup blended into the background. It was very disturbing. The question of, you know, we don't treat encryption differently currently anywhere, and that is a very difficult question in jurisdictions where encryption is treated differently, or that there are laws against encryption of certain traffic. To date, we really haven't had an objection to that, but of course that day is coming. You know, with the looming question of how DNS traverses international borders is one that nations have been trying to solve themselves, notably China, by simply denying it. You know, even in Europe, I'm sure there are going to be questions about how that's done between nations. You know, when a customer is in nation A and the termination point is in nation B. So your question is, I think there's a lot of depth in that question that's hard to answer right now. From our perspective, and we of course are different than the other folks on the call, because we aren't we're not a telecommunications carrier by most definitions in most nations. Our goal is to try to keep the traffic as local as possible, to keep it from crossing international borders. Whether that doesn't have anything to do with encryption, though, that's just an architectural model in general. And then, you know, further in your question are questions like, well, what domains are allowed to be resolved? I think that's outside of the scope of this call, but there are much bigger issues at stake there. But just for the encryption component, our goal is to be able to answer all the encrypted queries in country as best as possible. Now, routing sometimes doesn't terminate things in country, and this is another. Again, this leads down the road of, well, okay, why aren't IXs more popular? How do we get IXs to be more popular so that traffic stays local instead of traversing international borders? There's almost a whole conference in how to answer your question at the levels I think it needs to go into.
Yeah, out of interest, and I guess this is mainly for Joe and John, given you got different privacy requirements in different states, I think, is it 3 states have got the sort of a GDPR type requirement. California, Washington, and one other, I think, last time I checked. Do you have to treat those differently to the rest, or if you like, are you dealing with the highest common denominator?
Yeah. So we deal with the highest common denominator by applying the GDPR specification to our data set. So that kind of solves it for, we haven't found anyone who is more strict than that, and if we do, we'll figure out how to solve it. So most of the US states, there's been no court case on this, of course, so I can't say with any surety, but GDPR seems to be a sufficient metric for the states that have enacted their own privacy policies, and we'll see how that pans out in the courts.
Hey, Andrew, Glenn here. I can, for Comcast, what I can say is we apply consistent policy. You can read about it on our website where we posted our DNS privacy policy.
Yeah, fair point. I forgot about that, and it is commendably clear.
And I was going to defer to Glenn anyway.
Very sensible, Joe. Okay.
Actually, I'll pose that as a question. Does anyone on the call have a belief that there is something more strict than GDPR? Is that the highest common denominator? We've always assumed that it is, and as far as I know it is, but does anyone have any better insights?
Those pesky Europeans.
I think that the subtlety isn't so much in which one's the strictest. I think that there's sometimes some subtle differences between one versus the other. And it's there that it lies the landmines.
Yeah.
Sure. And there are contradictions in some places, depending on your status as a carrier or whatever the national regimen is. You may be required to store things, and so that complicates the matter.
Yeah, and I mean, all this is, we're all sort of, walking through this minefield here because, frankly, none of this stuff has yet been really tackled by the lawyers and policymakers through, court evaluations of, does doing X comply with the intent of this regulation? And, everyone's sort of loath to be the guy that says, yes, it absolutely does, and Discovery doesn't, and Discovery needs a new job.
You've also got to you've also got to look at the national implementations as well. So the UK may well have a different national implementation depending on, say, what entities in DOE we decided were subject to GDPR, etc. And other individual countries may initially decide other things as well. And I mean, obviously in the EU, they'll try and get one common definition for GDPR purposes, but then sort of countries like ourselves that are broadly aligned may well adopt a different purpose because outside the EU, we would be allowed to have a different firm of view on the world anyway.
And that's another whole conference discussion.
That's another whole discussion, which I won't go into because I'm a UK government rep on this call, so I shall say no more about that bit.
Well, and none of this ever really is settled, for the longest time. I just read an article, I think it was up in Canada, where some judge said, "Oh no, IP addresses aren't PII," which kind of like threw a lot of people into a tailspin because a lot of people sort of thought, "No, they are PII." Now you have a judge saying they're not. So where this is going to end up, it's going to keep a lot of people going to conferences when conferences happen again. For many years.
Yes. I see Brian has raised his hand and we've got about 2 minutes left on the call. So Brian, fire away.
Just a question for John. I know you said it's sort of out of scope, but as a yes/no question, do you have to give different responses in different countries based on local legislation? Is that something you actually do, or are you kind of waiting until the lawsuit hits?
The latter. So no, we don't provide different answers. We're waiting for the lawsuit to hit. So yeah, there is no national distinction at this point. And if there are some places that have that we've gotten the clear idea where we cannot serve, as an example, we have no systems in China, we have no systems in Iran, etc. And that's, I don't expect that we would deploy in places like that because of those domestic issues that would prevent us from providing true answers or answers that are consistent.
Do you block traffic from those areas out of curiosity? No,
we don't.
Okay.
No. In fact, we get quite a bit of traffic from those areas specifically because of those domestic policies.
Yeah, but you haven't got servers in them or nodes or whatever in them.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point because Like the people I'm working with, we have separate servers in China to give completely different answers for that reason. But that's the only country that we do it for so far.
Yeah.
So hi, it's Pat here from Ofcom. Kind of a question then. So could you see it as conceivable? And this is a gentleman from Quad 9, that if the regime became too onerous and too kind of like constantly saying you've got to block this or X domain this, you'd withdraw from a territory, or would you kind of like this is something we cope with?
I think so the audio was a little poor there, but I think the question to summarize was, would you withdraw from a territory in which we were told to alter our answers or not to provide answers? The answer to that question at the moment is yes, we would withdraw. I can't say that would be our answer forever. There might be extenuating circumstances. Each case is going to be different, but right now I'd say the answer is yes, we would withdraw. But so far we have not had that request or had those requirements, so I would have to we'd have to treat that on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Well, look, we're out of time. I'm conscious a lot of people got other appointments, so need to drop off. Looking at some chat messages. So can I thank John and Joe and Nick and Andy for sharing the information that you have, and hopefully others found that useful. It sounds like there's good ground covered, but plenty more to do on this as everything matures. But if anyone's got any good ideas for some stress testing on Doe, there's a clear market opportunity for you at the moment. So on that note, thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and no doubt we'll speak soon. Thank you.
Thank you.